All right, now that we have talked about how blood flow is regulated to different areas of the body depending on their needs, we know that the heart is going to be pushing blood throughout the body, and the vascular system works in pressurizing that blood flow so that it can return back to the heart. We know that the blood flow is dictated by the pressure the blood is exerting on the artery walls and the vascular resistance that is being offered by the vessels against blood. So we know that in order to increase blood flow to the areas that are demanding it, the blood vessels are going to be able of vasodilating or restricting blood flow to the areas that are not needed by vasoconstricting. We know that the ability of the vessels to increase in size is very important to decreasing vascular resistance. We know that if your vessels were not able to vasodilate, the pressures inside the body could rise for as much as 800 millimeters of pressure, which will burst your arteries. So that's why radius is so important. So what's some of the things that activate the vasodilation of arterioles and arteries? Locally, so they're capable of their own kind of regulation. Changes in metabolic needs are going to be one of the biggest drivers for vasodilation and vasoconstriction of arterioles. Typically, when there is an increased demand for oxygen and an increased metabolite production, such as lactic acid, CO2, which lead to a drop in pH, lead to an increase in temperature, all these metabolites that are as a result of anaerobic energy production or aerobic energy production is going to lead to vasodilation because there is increased need for nutrients to reach this area. So vasodilation is powerfully controlled by metabolite production. Pressure also plays a role as the arterioles and arteries themselves have baroreceptors, so they're capable of changing their reactions based on changes in pressure. And as the pressure inside decreases, there is further dilation. As pressure increases, there's contraction. That is a myogenic control of intrinsic blood flow. And last but not least are chemicals that are produced by the inner lining of your arteries. We call that the endothelium. They are capable of producing powerful vasodilators such as nitric oxide, prostaglandins, and EDHF. And all of these are going to do is that they're going to align themselves and have an action on the smooth muscle and going to allow for vasodilation. It's going to play a big role during exercise because it's also going to work to offset sympathetic activity. And here's what I mean by sympathetic activity. Because outside of regulating its own size, arterioles and arteries are also under the control of the central nervous system. So they are extrinsically regulated and they are under what is called vasomotor tone. What that means is that there is a baseline constriction of the body that is induced by sympathetic activity. So there's a baseline sympathetic activity to your arterioles that are kind of having them to be in a state of constriction at rest, and that tends to increase with exercise, which leaves a little bit of a conundrum because during exercise, we want to increase blood flow rather than constrict. So how can we fit the opposing roles of these two actions here, whereas we have sympathetic activity wanting to constrict, but all of the other ones that we're talking about wanting to vasodilate. So that's why we need to talk about muscle blood flow. And we're not going to go into the specifics behind all that's going on here. Something that you're interested in, going to go into very advanced XFES. But what is going on here that I want to highlight is that as the sympathetic nervous system is trying to activate constriction of the smooth muscle, we have nitric oxide, EDHF, and all of those vasodilators that are coming to block the impacts of the sympathetic nervous system. So they are working to offset sympathetic activity and hyperpolarize the membrane, therefore making it more difficult for vasoconstriction to occur. So since they are blocking sympathetic activity at the smooth muscle, vasoconstriction does not occur at the muscle level vasodilation occurs, which allows more blood to reach the muscles. There's also an additional effect that is compounding to this, which happens during hypoxia, which is low levels of oxygen present in the muscles. That is going to increase vasodilation even further. So if there is a higher need for oxygen, the muscles are not receiving enough oxygen, there's going to be an overcompensation of the smooth muscle of the arterioles to vasodilate even further, therefore facilitating higher exposure of oxygen to this tissue. So just again, very quickly, because I know sometimes this can be a little complicated, but there are three main variables that are going to dictate the radius of your arterioles and arteries to determine the blood flow that goes through them. Oxygen demand and metabolic production are going to be powerful vasodilators. Pressure is going to be acting as a regulator for dilation and constriction, and the inner lining of the arteriole themselves that produces the powerful vasodilators that we see here. We know that during rest, it is controlled by sympathetic activity, so pressure can be maintained. During exercise, there is an increased sympathetic activity, so it would make no sense for vasoconstriction to occur to the blood. So the blood engages in what is called functional sympatholysis that hyperpolarizes the membrane and prevents constriction. Further increases in vasodilation can be caused by hypoxia, which is low levels of oxygen in the muscle, which is going to create a response where more oxygen is trying to reach the muscle. So further vasodilation occurs. So three local controls: a metabolic regulation, pressure regulation, and endothelial vasodilators. One external regulator, which is sympathetic activity, and two muscle regulators, which is functional sympatholysis and compensatory vasodilation.